social media? Is it mostly a good thing or bad thing? Also, do your own kids use it?
Wow. Thank you. I wish my kids were here, but I think they got sick of me talking to the left. That is such a good question. That is such a good question. All right. Let me speak about myself first. I use social media on a very limited basis, and I only use Twitter. Okay? And I mean, or X, or whatever you want to call it. When I use X, I basically don't use the algorithm. I use just I follow the people I follow. In other words, I have there are some thinkers that I respect, and I want to hear their opinions. I follow them on Twitter. So I'd say it's almost like me going to a bookstore and just very selectively picking the books I kind of want to read. Okay, so that's how I spend 2 minutes a year on Facebook. I still barely know how to use Instagram, and it bores me. So that's so I use Twitter as an opportunity to learn. Okay, so social media could be, and in this case I'm referring to Twitter, where I can control my algorithm. Because again, I'm following, 700 people, and at some point I decided that those people had something interesting I wanted to learn from them. And it's like a source of news, source of news that I would, sometimes, actually, I'll give you an example. I follow newspapers from all over the world on Twitter. Why? Because I want to get different perspective on the same news. Because I don't necessarily learn not to trust just one news source that could be biased. So this is how I'm using it. Now, when it comes to kids, I would argue that this is a question that requires a book almost. Like there's a lot of layers to this. But number one, let's say I'm going to give you a more benevolent answer to this. Let's say you follow Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Tony Robbins, and some other great thinkers on TikTok. And Warren Buffett becomes a TikToker and comes up with 2 or 3 videos a day that are 30 seconds long. And so does everybody else, people you actually respect. And you spend 1 hour a day looking at those videos, I would argue that's a waste of time. Here's why. Your retention is going to be 0. Because here's what happens, and this is the problem is in part, again, I'm talking about benevolent social media, where there's actually good content that actually, in general, could actually make you a better person, make you grow. But here's what happens, and this is the problem with TikTok. You just watched the 30-second video that had some insights. And then right before you had time to process that information, you watch the next TikTok. So your ability to process that information, you never had an opportunity to take that information, process it, and put it into memory. And so if you just watched in 1 hour 120 TikToks, even with great information, just because you watch so many of them, your retention is going to be very low. And so therefore, I would argue that you want to limit just how much time you spend. Now, I'm talking about just good social media, okay? Now, when it comes to, but the social media, I've been very kind, right, charitable right now to social media. But there is obviously plenty of bad ones, right, where you suddenly, it activates your lizard brain because now you see that your friends are in the south of France and you have jealousy. Or see, look at the life they have. So, and this is almost like it's very this lizard brain is very difficult for us to overcome that because the jealousy is always going to be there. And you always think your friends are going to have a better life, your life is not as exciting. And guess what? By doing this, you just made yourself a little bit less happy, okay? Because you're doing comparative analysis. In addition to that, then you have algorithm. That algorithm figured out if you watched a lot of videos with, I'm just making this up, not picking a side, with Tucker Carlson, suddenly it's going to start feeding you only right side, for propaganda. Or if they figure out that you like who is Rachel Maddow, and it's going to be left propaganda. So suddenly you are getting exposed to the algorithm, and algorithm feeds you the news, and your understanding of the world changes. So I would argue you want to be very careful how you use social media for these reasons. My kids, My daughter doesn't have a. Actually, I'll tell you about my kids. My daughter Hannah, who got sick of listening to me and left, she put my son put time controls on social media. So there's I know on iPhone, I'm sure Android has the same thing. You can put what's called parental controls, but they actually, without my intervention, they put parental controls on their phone to limit how much they export. They knew that the lizard brain is stronger than them, and they put parental controls on themselves how much they use social media. So I find that, there are times when I find myself that I spend too much on X or Twitter myself, and it's obsessive. I literally just delete it from my phone, okay? And then maybe 2 months later I reinstall it, and again, knowing that you are basically fighting the environment that's stronger than you, that's a big deal. Just if you realize that the environment is stronger than you, and then just try to create the environment where you don't have to fight. That, by the way, fighting that also causes, consumes energy. So, so that's kind of, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Graham from London. First time here, and I understand this used to be a very small group, which has grown to this, and I can see why. Thank you very much for your insights. Mine's, I think, maybe the penultimate question by the looks of it. So, GDP on the US. So the figures have just come out a few days ago, slightly negative, but there was two major anomalies from my understanding. One is that consumers were adding to GDP by panic buying iPhones pre-running the tariffs, but then you also had the negative, which is 40% increase in imports, so which balanced out that GDP figure. So I don't know that GDP figure actually gave any indication of the real situation. Do you have any idea what the tariffs are going to do in the next 2 or 3 GDP results?
I mean, just to be talking in broad terms and long term, not quarters, but maybe years. I mean, any way you look at it, tariffs are a tax on the economy, a tax on the consumer, or whoever, they're gonna show up in prices. And when they show up in prices, that little experiment that just happened with Amazon trying to put the tariffs in, into explaining why the prices went up, and Trump administration kind of did not like that. But that's what tariffs are. They just make everything more expensive. Now you can argue there are reasons why. It's taking me a second to answer your question but there are. I would argue some tariffs we need to have, we need to produce APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, that go into our drugs. We can't, from the country perspective, I would argue that it's not in our national security to have all of that produced in China. That's just too great of a risk, right? If I, for every pill I buy, I have to pay 20 cents surcharge, that is because it takes more. I mean, it takes more. It's more expensive to produce in the United States. That's the price we pay for 5 years from now if we have some kind of confrontation with China, that we have drugs on our shelves. So there is a reason why. So you want to have some tariffs, but I think they are not really so. At the end of the day, a lot of industries that went outside the United States, we probably don't want to have them in the United States, because Americans don't want to get paid $3 an hour and make sneakers, Nike shoes. There's two impacts of tariffs. Number one, it creates immediate uncertainty, and that in itself may actually cause a recession. What I just told you here, there's nothing, no groundbreaking stuff here, but it's just, if everybody puts their investment decisions on a pause, you're going to have a recession. That's just, so it's most likely going to cause slowdown in the economy in general because it's everything. It can look at it this way: it removes consumer discretionary income, right? If now you're spending more money on pharmaceuticals, on more money on Nike shoes or whatever the tariffs are impacting, you have less money for something else. So it's impossible for. Now, if we're going to create more jobs, so the way it would have said this, if we suddenly create more jobs to offset that, and I don't know if this is going to happen or not. So I am basically watching very carefully. The way we express it in our portfolio, we have almost very little exposure to anything cyclical. Just that's so I'm, because that's how we express it in our portfolio. We own very few cyclical stocks. We have exposure to oil stocks, but and which you would argue are cyclicals, and I agree with that. But I would argue that weaker U.S. dollar makes oil more expensive in dollar terms, and that's a tailwind. And also, us exporting LNG to Europe, which is natural gas to Europe, also benefits them. But outside of that, we have very little exposure to cyclical stocks. So this is how I look at this and say this is difficult, and I don't really know exactly how it's going to play out, and I can see the negative side of this. And I said, well, we're going to take a different route. We're just going to have a very little exposure to cyclicality of the economy. So we have we don't have any exposure to any credit in the portfolio, because when the economy goes into recession, credit does not do well. So in other words, if you own credit card companies or banks, in general, they don't do well. Those businesses, and am I answering your question?
Just
yeah.
What's going to happen to GDP next quarter?
Yeah.
Is it going to be negative?
Oh, I was not answering that question, and because I don't have an answer to that question, so who knows? All right, thank you. Okay, last two people, and that's it. All right.
Hi, Vitaliy. My name is Max from Toronto. Thank you for doing this. It's been a great morning. I had similarly two questions, and thank you to the extent you can answer them. First pertains to your opinions, thoughts, or experiences, if you've had any, closer to the private equity or direct investing space, especially things maybe like real estate, which for many of us in North America is something we're involved with. And second, as an investor, what do you see for the companies you invest in as the correct way they should think about leverage?
Oh, okay. So is that two questions or one question? So
It's two, but they're a little related, because a lot of the time, direct equity or direct investments, you're going into something where leverage is a part of it. But I'd just be curious separately, as you look at different industries or managers, are there any red flags where some people have spoken about in the past that mistakes have been made where companies get a little too comfortable using leverage? Love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. So it's a good question. I think the way I look at leverage, right? Leverage can make you a lot of money. It can blow you up. Clients give us their irreplaceable money because a lot of them are retired or this is their life savings, and they hire me because they think I won't blow up. Okay, so I don't want. So leverage is a road to kind of to enhance somebody's return, but it's also to blow up the portfolio. So when I look at companies, if they have a lot of leverage, I want to make sure that they're in the business that affords them to have a lot of leverage. And I'll give you a couple examples. We own a pipeline. We own Enterprise Products, which is a pipeline company, and they have leverage. Well, that's a business that should not exist without leverage, because return on capital is, 5 or 6%, and return on equity is 13 or whatever that number is, 15 or 18%. And that's a business that should have leverage because it's a very not cyclical, very predictable business. So in this case, I'm fine with pipeline, a company having leverage. We own cable stocks, and they have leverage, and I'm fine there as well, because you have 30, like Charter has 30 million customers, and it's a very high recurrence of revenue despite their competitive threats, still very stable business. Okay. Now, if I own a retailer, I would want them to have as little debt as possible, just because of the nature of that business. So I would not want to have a portfolio of charters. I would not want to have a portfolio of enterprise products. And in portfolio construction, it makes sense. And from investment in real estate, a lot of times leverage shows up in a very different ways. I'll give an example. So if you are exposed to anything real estate investment and related, even if you own a company that doesn't looks under levered, you're still exposed to interest rates, because if interest rates go higher, suddenly demand for your products decline. So there's an indirect way to get exposed to interest rates, not necessarily just through leverage. So I guess to answer your question, I just look at it at risk as a risk, and then we just try to stress test our portfolio and that investment for that risk. That's basically how I look at it. Just try to say, okay, if that's a risk, how do I make sure that I don't blow up on that? Is that appropriate for this company to have leverage? If it's not, then I should not own the stock. Is it helpful? Yeah. Oh. All right, last question. And you drove, so I
did. I drove from Fort Worth. I'm Tag Coolidge from Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm a member of an organization called Better Investing. I have a family investment club that we lead, and one of the premises of that is that you diversify your portfolio, small, mid cap, and large, etc. And one of the things we've had a real issue is trying to find good quality small companies in which we can invest. And one of the problems we've had is that you may find a quality company that has really good management, and then they get gobbled up, and the investors or small investors are not always rewarded. So how do you look at small companies? Is there a place in that for small companies in your portfolio?
Well, thank you for this question. We own some small companies. If you own a small company, it really has to be exceptional. And for us, there is another layer of risk, of issues that you may not have. Liquidity. Like when we buy a small company, for us, sometimes buying 10 or 20, $30 million worth is actually means we are a big part of the daily volume. So it's a headache. So it has to be worthy of that headache. I think usually when we buy small companies, what's really becomes important to us is management. Management is very, very important, but management is almost everything for a small company, because the way bad management destroys a larger company is through capital allocation. I'm generalizing right now, but the way through capital allocation, because a company can destroy, for a large company, a lot of value just by making a dumb acquisition, just billions of dollars with, now small companies, capital allocation is important, but also a lot of operational decisions that become important as well. And usually small company, again, generalizing, it's not as diversified, it's not as established. So therefore the tolerance for mistakes is a lot of times is smaller as well. So for us, management, like we are obsessed about management anyway, but for a small company, for us, usually to get interested in that business, it has to be management that led us to that. And remember, I only need 25 stock portfolios, so if I have a few of those, I'm fine. I'm happy to buy a small cap company, but it really has to be exceptional. And there are not that many. I mean, they're out there, but just not that many of those. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming. I always look forward to this, get-togethers, and it's just such a privilege that all, well, I'm the warm-up for the bigger show, but I'm still that you could have gone for breakfast somewhere else, And thank you so much, and I really appreciate you being here. And I hope to see you next year again. So thank you.